Dolores Freeman learned early that some places could hide in plain sight. Every morning, just after 6, she walked the same 4 blocks to the bus stop. Same cracked sidewalks. Same maple tree with the broken branch that never fell. Same quiet stretch of Sycamore Road where the air felt a little heavier, especially in the early hours when the city hadn't fully woken up yet. That was where the house stood. 2 stories. White paint, long past its prime, peeling in thin curls that clung stubbornly to the wood. Windows boarded over so long ago the plywood had darkened with age. A roof that dipped slightly in the middle like it had given up trying to hold itself straight. People didn't stop there. They didn't slow down. They didn't look. They walked past it the way people walked past a stranger sleeping on a bench. Eyes forward, shoulders tight, pretending absence was a form of kindness. Dolores noticed it because she noticed most things. It was a habit she'd never managed to break. When you grow up needing to read rooms before you enter them, noticing becomes second nature. The city said the house was condemned. A fire years back. Electrical maybe. After that, it was supposed to be empty. Unsafe. Forgotten. But Dolores had cleaned enough homes and lived long enough to know that labels like empty and forgotten were often lies people told themselves to sleep better at night. She worked as a live-in maid for Richard Holloway, a man whose name meant something in Boston circles even if his face didn't appear in magazines anymore. The house she worked in sat miles away from Sycamore Road, large and quiet and always too clean, no matter how much work she put into it. Still, every morning and every evening, Dolores passed the abandoned house. At first it was just a feeling, a tug at the back of her attention, like the sense of being watched but softer, less threatening, more expected. One Tuesday morning she noticed the trash bins beside the house weren't tipped over like usual. They were upright, aligned. One of the lids wasn't fully closed. She slowed her steps. Probably raccoons, she told herself, or teenagers messing around. She kept walking. That night, after a double shift and aching feet, she took the bus home later than usual. The streetlights on Sycamore Road flickered on one by one as dusk settled in. When she reached the abandoned house, something made her stop. A brief flash of light. Not from the street. From the second floor. It was faint. A blink and you miss a glow like someone shielding a flashlight with their palm. It vanished almost as soon as it appeared. Dolores stood there longer than she meant to, heart tapping faster than it should have. "Get a grip," she whispered to herself. She turned away. But she didn't forget. The next few days she found herself watching that house without meaning to. Looking for signs. Telling herself she wasn't. Footprints appeared in the soft dirt near the side yard after a light rain. Adult-sized. Purposeful. Gone by the next day. Once, early in the morning, she caught the faint smell of something warm in the air. Not smoke. Not trash. Food. That was when the unease settled into something sharper. Dolores had lost things in her life. People too. Not in dramatic ways that made headlines. In quiet ways. Slow ways. The kind of loss that didn't ask permission. So maybe that was why, late one rainy night, when sleep refused to come, she heard it. A voice. It drifted through the open window of her small apartment, carried on damp air and distant traffic. Oh, unsteady. A man's voice singing softly to himself. The melody was familiar but not clean. Notes bent where they shouldn't have. Words blurred together. It sounded like someone trying to remember something important and failing just enough to hurt. Dolores sat up in bed. The singing came again. Clearer this time. From Sycamore Road. She wrapped herself in a sweater and stepped onto the porch. Rain misted her face. The street was empty. But the sound was real. Lonely. Human. When it stopped, the silence felt louder than the song ever had. The next afternoon, Dolores took a different route home. At least that's what she told herself. She slowed as she reached the abandoned house. The front door, once nailed shut, now sat slightly ajar. Just enough to notice if you were looking. Her chest tightened. This time she didn't walk past. She stepped onto the warped porch and raised her hand. The wood creaked beneath her weight. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again, louder. Inside, something shifted. A breath. A shuffle. The door opened a fraction and an eye appeared in the gap. Alert. Wary. Very much alive. "What do you want?" a man's voice asked. Dolores swallowed. "I live nearby," she said. I wanted to make sure everything was okay." The eye studied her for a long moment, measuring, deciding. The door opened a little wider. And in that moment, standing face to face with a stranger where no one was supposed to exist, Dolores had no idea her life had just tilted in a direction she couldn't walk back from. If you're the kind of person who believes small choices don't matter, this is usually the moment you stop listening. But if you've ever wondered what happens when someone finally notices what everyone else ignores, you might want to stay. And maybe while you're here, let me know where you're listening from. Dolores learned the rules of the Holloway house without anyone ever sitting her down to explain them. They were unspoken, felt more than heard. The kind of rules that pressed against your chest when you crossed certain thresholds or asked the wrong question. The house itself was immaculate. Not warm. Not cold. Just maintained. Polished floors that reflected light without inviting it. Furniture chosen for durability more than comfort. Family photos conspicuously absent, except for one place Dolores wasn't supposed to touch. She discovered that on her second week. The study sat at the back of the house, walls lined with books that looked impressive but untouched. Dolores dusted carefully, moving slowly, the way you did in homes where money lived quietly and expected not to be disturbed. That was when she bumped the shelf. The frame slid forward, clipped the edge, and fell face down onto the desk with a sharp crack. Dolores's heart jumped. She reached for it instinctively. The photograph showed a man and a teenage boy standing close together. The man's arm rested stiffly on the boy's shoulder, like he wasn't used to contact. The boy's smile was half-formed, caught mid-laugh, eyes turned slightly away from the camera as if someone had just said something funny. There was a scar beneath his left eyebrow. Thin. Pale. Dolores barely had time to register it before a voice cut through the room. "Leave that." She turned. Richard Holloway stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the doorframe harder than necessary. His face had drained of color, leaving behind something tight and controlled. "I'm sorry, sir," Dolores said quickly. It slipped. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, took the frame from her hands, and turned it face down again with deliberate care. "That room doesn't need cleaning anymore," he said. "Yes, sir." He didn't look at her when he added, "And if you see anything else like that, don't." That was it. No explanation. No raised voice. Just a line drawn quietly and permanently. After that, Dolores noticed the other things. The locked bedroom at the end of the upstairs hallway. Always locked. Always clean on the outside, like the door itself still mattered. Fresh paint every few years even though no one went in. The calendar in the kitchen that skipped 1 week every November, as if time itself hesitated there. And Richard himself. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't kind either. He spoke when necessary. Ate alone. Slept poorly. On some mornings, Dolores found him already dressed at 5, staring out the window with a mug of coffee gone cold in his hands. Once she heard him pacing the hallway late at night. Back and forth, stopping only at the locked door. He never touched it. The driver mentioned it once, casually, while loading groceries into the trunk. "Hard time of year for him," the man said. Dolores glanced up. "Why's that?" The driver hesitated, then shrugged. "The boy." Dolores waited. "Julian," he added quietly. "Disappeared years back. Never found. Ran away." Dolores asked. The driver shook his head. "That's what the papers said. But kids don't just vanish like that." He shut the trunk and didn't say another word. From then on, Dolores noticed how carefully everyone avoided the subject. The housekeeper who came twice a week. The gardener. Even the family friends who occasionally visited and spoke in polite, empty circles. It was like Julian existed in negative space, defined by absence, felt everywhere, named nowhere. One evening, as Dolores folded laundry downstairs, Richard turned on the radio in the kitchen. Classical music filled the space. Strings. Soft and steady. He froze. His hand hovered over the dial, then snapped it off. Julian used to hum that, he said, more to the air than to her. Dolores stopped folding. Yes, sir? She asked gently. He shook his head as if realizing she was there. Nothing. But his hands were shaking. That night, Dolores lay awake thinking about the boy in the photograph. The scar. The half-smile. The way the frame had been turned face down, like a decision made over and over again. She thought about the abandoned house on Sycamore Road. About the light. About the voice singing in the rain. And for the first time, a thought formed that made her chest tighten with something dangerously close to hope. What if the rules of this house weren't meant to protect grief? What if they were meant to keep something buried? She turned onto her side, staring into the dark, knowing sleep wouldn't come. Because some rules, once noticed, don't stay invisible for long. The study began to bother Dolores in ways she couldn't explain. It wasn't the room itself. It was quiet, well-lit, orderly. A place designed to suggest control. But every time she stepped inside, she felt like she was standing in a paused moment, as if something important had been interrupted and never allowed to finish. After the photograph incident, Richard stopped using the room altogether. The door stayed closed. Not locked, just avoided. Like the locked bedroom upstairs, it became another space defined by what wasn't allowed. But Dolores still had to clean it. She worked carefully. Dusting without touching. Straightening books without opening them. Wiping the desk without disturbing what lay on it. Except the photograph didn't stay hidden. One afternoon, while vacuuming, she noticed it had been moved. No longer tucked at the edge of the desk, face down. It sat in the center now. Still turned away. Like someone had set it there deliberately, then changed their mind about looking. Dolores stared at it longer than she should have. Curiosity is rarely loud. Most of the time, it arrives quietly, wearing the clothes of responsibility. She reached out and turned the frame over. The boy's face filled her vision again. Julian Holloway. She knew the name now. The driver had said it once, reluctantly, like speaking it might cause something to happen. Dolores studied the photograph the way you studied someone on a bus who reminded you of a person you used to know. The boy looked about 17. Maybe 18. His posture was relaxed, but there was tension in his shoulders, a stiffness that didn't belong to youth. The man beside him, Richard, stood straighter, his expression careful, guarded even in celebration. It wasn't a happy photo. It was a managed one. Dolores's eyes returned to the scar beneath Julian's left eyebrow. Thin. Pale. The kind that came from a childhood accident. Not dramatic. Not worth mentioning unless you knew to look for it. Her breath slowed. She had seen that scar recently. On Sycamore Road. The thought made her grip the edge of the desk. She turned the frame face down again just as footsteps sounded in the hallway. Richard stopped in the doorway. They looked at each other. He didn't glance at the desk. Didn't ask what she'd been doing. His gaze settled on her face instead, sharp and searching. "You don't need to be in here today," he said. "I was just finishing up, sir." He nodded once. "You can go." That was all. But as she left, Dolores felt something shift. Not anger. Not suspicion. Fear. That evening she took her time walking home. The sky was low and gray, the kind that pressed down on the city and made every sound feel closer. When she reached Sycamore Road, she slowed without meaning to. The abandoned house looked the same as always. Except it didn't. One of the upstairs windows had a curtain now. Not a proper one. Just a piece of fabric tacked up from the inside. Dark. Intentional. Dolores's heart beat harder. She stood there until the street light flickered on. "Daniel," she said softly, unsure why she whispered. The door didn't open. She went home. That night the singing came again. Clearer this time. Less broken. The melody wound through the walls of her apartment, slipping into her thoughts. It wasn't a performance. It was memory trying to survive. Dolores sat on the edge of her bed, hands clasped together. She thought of Richard turning the radio off too quickly. Of the locked bedroom. Of a father who paced hallways but never opened doors. And of a young man who lived in a house everyone pretended wasn't there. The next morning, Dolores made a decision she told no one about. She stopped at the grocery store before work. Nothing fancy. Bread, soup, fruit, bottled water. That evening, she placed the bag carefully on the steps of the abandoned house and knocked once. She stepped back. The door opened slowly. The man stood there, hair uncombed, eyes wary. "You shouldn't," he said. "I know," Dolores replied. "But you need to eat." He hesitated, then took the bag. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded, turning to leave. As she stepped off the porch, his voice stopped her. "What's your name?" She turned. "Dolores." He nodded once. "Daniel," he said again. But this time his voice wavered. And Dolores knew, with a certainty that made her stomach drop, that the name wasn't the only thing he was lying about. Because people who lie about who they are don't usually sound afraid. They sound like someone afraid of being found. Dolores did not tell anyone about the groceries. Not the driver. Not the housekeeper. Not the woman who owned the corner store and always asked if Dolores was still working for that rich man up the hill. She kept it to herself the way people keep things they aren't sure they're allowed to believe yet. For a few days after, nothing changed. She walked to work. Cleaned rooms that looked like no one lived in them. Walked home past the abandoned house and pretended not to look. But the house was changing. Slowly. Quietly. The way things change when someone is paying attention. The trash bin stayed upright now. The fabric behind the upstairs window shifted positions. Sometimes pulled back just enough to let light through, sometimes sealed tight like a held breath. Once, Dolores noticed a pair of shoes drying on the back porch railing. Men's shoes. Old but clean. Someone was taking care of the place. And someone was letting her see it. On Thursday, she found a folded note tucked beneath her doormat. Just one word, written carefully in block letters. "Thanks." She stared at it for a long time before picking it up. That night she brought more food. This time she knocked and waited. The door opened faster than before. Daniel stood there, eyes scanning the street behind her before settling back on her face. "You shouldn't come so often," he said. "You're eating it," she replied. He didn't argue. Inside, the house looked different in daylight. Still damaged. Still cold. But less abandoned. A candle burned on a makeshift table. The mattress had a clean sheet now. A small radio sat near the window, its antenna bent but functional. "You like music?" Dolores said. He shrugged. "It keeps my head straight." She nodded. "I get that." They stood there, neither sure what came next. "You don't have to stay," he said. "People get curious." "I won't," she replied. "I'm good at minding my business." He looked at her like he didn't quite believe that, then stepped aside. That was how the routine started. Dolores brought food once or twice a week. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. She never stayed long. Never asked questions that felt too sharp. Daniel talked about small things. The weather. A book he'd found in a free box near the library. A memory of a diner that used to be on Main Street before it closed. He never talked about his past, but his body did. He startled at sudden noises. Winced when sirens passed too close. Checked windows even when the street was empty. One evening, as she handed him a bag of groceries, her eyes caught on something she hadn't noticed before. The scar. It ran beneath his left eyebrow, thin and pale, almost hidden by hair that had grown too long. The light hit it just right, and Dolores felt the room tilt. She had seen that scar before. Her fingers tightened on the bag. You okay? Daniel asked. Yes, she said too quickly. He studied her face. You don't look okay. It's nothing, she replied. Just tired. But her heart was pounding. All the way home her thoughts spiraled. The photograph. The scar. The song. Coincidences existed. She knew that. She'd lived long enough to accept randomness. But this didn't feel random. The next day at work, she found herself standing outside the locked bedroom upstairs. She had no reason to be there. No task. Just a pull she couldn't explain. She rested her hand on the door. Cold. Solid. She imagined a teenage boy on the other side. Imagined him packing a bag. Imagined him being told something was for his own good. Dolores stepped back like she'd been burned. That evening she returned to Sycamore Road earlier than usual. Daniel was outside this time, sitting on the porch steps, head bowed, humming softly. The same melody. Her chest tightened. You always hum that, she said. He looked up, startled. Do I? Yes. He frowned as if trying to place it. My mother used to play it, he said after a moment. On the violin. Dolores swallowed. Where is she now? His jaw tightened. Gone. She nodded, respecting the boundary. But later, as she turned to leave, a question slipped out before she could stop it. What year were you born? The change in him was immediate. His shoulders stiffened. His gaze hardened. Why do you want to know that? He asked. No reason, Dolores said quickly. Just. You don't get to ask that, he snapped. She took a step back. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. People always start with small questions, he said. Then they decide who I'm supposed to be. The door closed between them with a soft but final click. Dolores stood on the porch, heart racing. She had crossed a line. As she walked home, shame mixed with something else. Fear. Not of Daniel, but of the answer she was afraid he might give. Because if she was right, if the scar and the song and the silence all pointed in the same direction, then the truth wasn't just hiding in that abandoned house. It was waiting. And once it was spoken, nothing would stay buried. The rain came hard that night, a steady hammer against the rooftops of Dolores's small apartment. The kind that soaks through shoes, drips down collars, and leaves the city smelling of wet asphalt and distant fires. She sat by the window, steaming cup of tea in hand, watching the drops race each other down the glass. Sleep had abandoned her again. It wasn't just the house on Sycamore Road. It wasn't just Daniel. Something in her chest tightened every time she thought of that scar, that photograph, that melody. She hadn't heard the singing in days until now. A low, rough voice carried faintly through the rain. At first she thought she imagined it. The wind can trick you sometimes. But it came again, stronger and unmistakable. A man singing. Off-key. Hesitant. Like he was piecing together a memory from the edges. Dolores sat frozen. Her cup trembled in her hands. She leaned closer to the window. It was him. She knew it. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. The melody wove itself through the downpour. She could just make out words, garbled, incomplete. A song she couldn't place but recognized from somewhere buried in her memory. And then she remembered Richard's reaction to the radio. The way he had paused it abruptly, muttering about Julian humming it. Her heart jumped. Could it really be the same song? The same boy? Dolores forced herself to breathe. She wrapped her sweater tighter and stepped outside into the rain, bare hands wet within moments. The street was slick and reflective. Streetlights blurred into halos in the downpour. The house loomed ahead, more threatening and fragile than ever. She stopped at the edge of the yard. The front door was slightly ajar, like it had been waiting for her. She swallowed hard and lifted a hand to knock, but before she could, the door creaked open on its own. Daniel stepped into the dim light, water dripping from his hair, eyes wide, cautious. What are you doing here? His voice was a mixture of alarm and curiosity. I heard you singing, she said softly, teeth chattering. I couldn't sleep. I thought. You thought what? He asked sharply. I don't know, she admitted. I just wanted to see if you were okay. For a moment he studied her. The streetlights glinted in his eyes, reflecting the storm. Then without a word he stepped aside. The inside of the house smelled damp and faintly of wood smoke. A mattress lay in the corner with a thin blanket. A small candle flickered, giving off shadows that danced across peeling wallpaper. Near the window sat a stack of books, a worn radio, and a few items folded neatly as if to prove someone cared enough to organize them. Dolores handed him a towel she had brought from her apartment. He took it silently, drying his hair, still not meeting her eyes. Why do you live here? She asked cautiously. He shrugged. Because it's here. Because no one else wants to know about me. She nodded, understanding more than she should. Some silences were heavier than words. The singing had stopped, but the melody lingered, echoing in her mind. She noticed again the scar beneath his left eyebrow, pale and narrow. Her breath caught. The photograph. The face. The boy. It all came together like a puzzle she wasn't ready to complete. You shouldn't be here, he said, quieter now. People get curious. They ask questions. They find out things you don't want them to know. I'm not here to cause trouble, she said. You just what? He interrupted, voice sharper than before. I just care, she said, almost whispering. He looked at her like she had said something foreign. Something dangerous. Care? He repeated. Yes. Care, she said firmly. Doesn't anyone care about you? He flinched at that, pulling back slightly. His eyes darkened, but there was something raw, unspoken, behind them. Something wounded. Dolores's stomach twisted. She wanted to reach out, but she knew better. Some wounds didn't need to be touched yet. Instead, she turned toward the door. I'll leave you to rest, she said. Before she stepped onto the porch, he called after her, quieter this time. What's your name? Dolores, she replied without hesitation. He nodded once. Daniel, he said again, voice hollow. But this time it wasn't entirely convincing. Dolores walked home in the rain, her mind a storm of thoughts heavier than the one above her. She couldn't shake the certainty building inside her. Something about him. About that scar. About the melody. And she knew she wasn't imagining it anymore. Because this time, the music and the face and the silence all pointed to the same truth. The truth that, once discovered, wouldn't leave anyone unchanged. And when she reached the edge of her street, her shoes soaked, her hands cold, she whispered into the night. Who are you really? The question floated back toward Sycamore Road, unanswered as the rain continued to fall. The answer was waiting. And Dolores had just taken the first step toward finding it. Her chest tightened, her mind racing. Because some discoveries don't announce themselves. They wait until someone notices. And tonight someone had noticed. Dolores didn't sleep that night. Not really. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear it. The soft rhythm of rain against the windows, and beneath it, the faint echo of that off-key melody. It haunted her, tugged at her chest, insisting she do something she didn't know she was ready for. By morning, the unease had hardened into resolve. She had to see him again. Not just for the curiosity or the singing or the scar that refused to leave her mind, but because something about him felt wrong in a way she couldn't ignore. He was alive. Human. And yet, the world had treated him like he wasn't. She packed a small bag before work. Bread, peanut butter, a few apples, and a bottle of water. Nothing fancy. Nothing impressive. Enough to matter. Enough to say I see you. When she reached the house on Sycamore Road that evening, the sky was bruised purple and gray. Streetlights flickered to life as if warning her that stepping closer meant crossing a line. Dolores's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her knuckles to the weathered door. Daniel? She called softly. No response. Only the whisper of leaves and the distant splash of puddles. She knocked again, louder this time, and waited. The door creaked open, just enough to reveal a pair of wary eyes. Daniel's eyes. dark, sharp, guarded. His body tensed as if bracing for a confrontation. "You shouldn't," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "I know," Dolores said, holding up the bag. "I brought food. Thought you might want it." His eyes flicked to the bag, then back to her. There was a hesitation there, a calculation that made her chest tighten. Finally he stepped aside. The inside of the house smelled of damp wood and old fabric. Faint smoke from a candle mixed with the subtle scent of soap someone had used long ago. Light from a single bulb in the ceiling flickered as she stepped inside. The space was small, makeshift. A mattress lay on the floor, a blanket neatly folded at the edge. On a crate nearby, a small radio rested beside a stack of worn books. Daniel moved carefully, as if her presence could shatter the fragile world he had built for himself. "I don't want trouble," she said quietly, setting the bag down on the mattress. He didn't respond. Instead, he picked up a loaf of bread, inspecting it, then set it aside with deliberate care. Finally he looked at her. "You keep coming back," he said, voice softer now, though still wary. "I don't mean to bother you," Dolores replied. "I just care that you're okay." He laughed once, humorless. "Care? No one cares about me." "Not really." Her heart clenched. She took a careful step closer. "I do. Even if it's just a little." Daniel's eyes flicked away, toward the window, toward nothing. He didn't say anything. His jaw tightened. The silence stretched between them, heavy and awkward and alive. Then, almost without warning, he muttered, "You don't understand." "Then help me understand," she said, softer this time. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he gestured to the mattress. "Sit. I'll get a chair." They sat in silence at first, the storm outside drumming on the roof and windows. Dolores noticed the scar again. Pale, thin, almost imperceptible under the dim light. Her stomach tightened. She knew that face. She knew that boy. "Why are you here?" she asked finally, careful, gentle. He shook his head. "Because I have nowhere else to go." Her chest ached. "You could come back. Go home. There are people who care." He interrupted sharply. "You don't know. You don't understand. Home isn't, it's not, safe." Dolores swallowed, realizing she had crossed another line. But something inside her refused to retreat. "Then tell me," she said, voice low but steady. "Tell me why." Daniel looked at her, the guard in his eyes flickering. For a moment, it was just a boy in the rain, scared, cautious, and alone. Then he exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough for her to see a glimpse of what he had endured. "I can't," he whispered. "Not yet." Dolores nodded, though her hands itched to reach out, to offer comfort she wasn't sure he would accept. They stayed that way, side by side, not speaking, listening to the storm and each other's quiet presence. A fragile trust was forming, unspoken but undeniable. As she stood to leave, he called softly, almost reluctantly, "Dolores." "Yes." "You keep noticing." She smiled faintly, heart hammering. "Because someone has to." The door closed behind her with a quiet click, leaving her standing in the rain, soaked and shivering. Walking home, Dolores felt a mixture of fear, hope, and something she couldn't quite name. Because she knew without a doubt that the life inside that abandoned house wasn't just surviving. It was hiding. And she had just found the first thread of a story that wouldn't let her go. The question now was simple, but terrifying. How long could she keep following it before it followed her back? Dolores didn't stop coming. Not because she had to, but because she couldn't ignore the pull. There was something about Daniel that pressed against her instincts, a quiet urgency that demanded attention without asking for it. Some nights she wondered if it was reckless. Some nights she didn't care. By the end of the week, a fragile routine had begun. Dolores would stop by the abandoned house on Sycamore Road after work, usually just long enough to leave food, sometimes to talk if Daniel allowed it. He rarely invited her inside. He never offered comfort. Yet, little by little, the space between them shrank. One evening the rain had stopped, leaving puddles and fog drifting low over the street. Dolores approached the house carefully, the dim light from a street lamp catching the outline of the old porch. She carried a small paper bag with a sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. Simple, practical. The door opened before she could knock. "You're early," Daniel said, voice flat but not unfriendly. "I finished work," she replied. "Thought I'd bring dinner." He stepped aside. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke and damp clothes, the same as the first night, but warmer somehow. A candle flickered near the mattress, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Dolores noticed a notebook lying on the floor, its pages filled with messy handwriting, diagrams, and notes. Something private, something carefully hidden. Daniel took the food silently, inspecting it as if he expected it to vanish. Then, without looking at her, he muttered, "You don't have to do this every day." "I know," she said softly. "I want to." For a long moment neither spoke. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the candle. She noticed how tense he still was, shoulders hunched, eyes scanning the room even as he sat on the edge of the mattress. Trauma left traces, small but sharp, and Dolores was learning to read them. "You sing again," she said finally, nodding toward the melody that lingered faintly in the corners of her mind. He froze. "I don't," he said quickly. "Just humming." "I know," she said gently. "It's the same song from before." His eyes flicked toward her, suspicion mingled with something she couldn't identify. Then he looked away. "It's nothing. Forget it." Dolores didn't press. She had learned enough about fear to know that pushing too hard only made it retreat faster. Instead she asked smaller things. The weather. A book he had picked up. The fact that his shoes were neatly lined on the porch instead of scattered like before. She didn't force conversation, but she stayed present, a quiet, steady presence that mattered more than she realized. As she reached for her bag to leave, Daniel spoke again, softer this time. "Why do you keep coming?" Dolores paused, considering her words carefully. "Because someone has to notice," she said. "Even when everyone else walks past." He said nothing, but she saw the flicker of emotion in his eyes. Vulnerability. Maybe relief. Maybe mistrust. It was impossible to tell, but it was there. The days passed in a rhythm of small gestures. Bread, water, fruit. Candles lit. Books arranged. Occasionally, a conversation that was careful and measured, never deep, never invasive. Dolores found herself laughing softly at his dry humor, the way he would comment on the clouds outside or complain about a leaky faucet. Humor was rare in his world, and it caught her off guard each time. But it was real. Human. And it reminded her that underneath all the layers of fear, he was still someone who deserved a life beyond hiding. One night, as she handed him a warm bowl of soup, she noticed something she hadn't before. A photograph pinned to a wall with a thumbtack. A family portrait, faded, edges curling. A boy, Julian, standing next to a man she immediately recognized. Richard Holloway. The same photo from the Holloway house. Her stomach twisted. "Where did you get this?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's eyes darkened. "It's mine," he said sharply. "Don't touch it." Dolores nodded, stepping back. She didn't need to see the whole story to understand. She already knew too much. And yet, something inside her ached at the realization. The boy in front of her was the same boy who had disappeared from the world. They sat in silence after that. Not because words were unnecessary, but because the weight of the truth made speech impossible. Dolores understood that Daniel wasn't ready to speak it aloud. And she wasn't ready either, not yet. As she left the house that night, stepping into the misty street, she felt the pull again. The pull that had brought her here, that had kept her returning. She had crossed a threshold. This was no longer casual care. She was entangled in a story bigger than herself, one that could unravel everything she thought she knew about loss, truth, and the fragile line between protection and confinement. And deep down she realized something chilling. This wasn't just about Daniel surviving the world outside. It was about keeping secrets. Secrets that could destroy people if revealed too soon. Dolores walked home under the street lights, rain-soaked streets shimmering in gold and gray, wondering if she was ready to see just how far the darkness went. Dolores hadn't planned on noticing it. Not really. She had seen the scar countless times in photographs, in passing glimpses, and she had stored it somewhere in the back of her mind like a puzzle piece she didn't yet know where to place. But that evening, under the flickering candlelight of the abandoned house, it hit her with impossible clarity. Daniel shifted on the edge of the mattress, stretching his arm to reach for a bottle of water. The sleeve of his shirt rode up just enough. There it was, the pale, thin line beneath his left eyebrow, subtle but unmistakable. Her breath caught. She stared at it, trying to convince herself it was coincidence. A minor injury from childhood. Something ordinary. But the scar was exactly the same as the one on Julian Holloway in the photograph she had seen weeks ago at the Holloway house. The same angle, the same pale pink curve. Her stomach tightened. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She swallowed, trying to steady her voice. Daniel, that scar, how did you get it? He froze, hand halfway to his water. His eyes narrowed, dark and unreadable. For a moment, the air between them seemed to crack. The storm outside couldn't have sounded louder. I told you, he said finally, voice clipped. No one needs to know that. It doesn't matter. Dolores nodded slowly, hiding the tremor in her fingers. I know, she said softly. I didn't mean to pry. But she had already pried. Her heart knew it before her lips could admit it. That scar, the song he hummed, the way he avoided certain questions. It all lined up. It couldn't be anyone else. Daniel shifted again, away from her gaze, wrapping his arms around himself like he could hide the memory embedded in his skin. You're different, he muttered almost to himself. Most people wouldn't notice something like that. Most people just walk by. Dolores shook her head. I notice things. Her voice was firmer now, steadier. I've learned it's important to notice things people try to hide. He laughed softly, humorless, a sound that made her chest ache. Notice me? You have no idea what you're stepping into. I want to, she said. Even if I don't fully understand it yet. He leaned back, eyes shadowed. You have no idea how complicated it is, how dangerous it is to even speak my name. Dolores didn't flinch. Then I'll be careful. I'll just be here. That's all I can do. For a while they sat in silence. The candle flickered between them, painting the room in warm gold and deep shadows. Outside, the wind rattled the old window frames, carrying a distant rumble of thunder. The abandoned house was quiet, but not empty. Not anymore. Finally, Daniel spoke again, softer this time. You don't know what it's like to disappear. To exist where everyone pretends you're gone. To watch the world move on without a word. Dolores nodded, her throat tight. I think I have an idea. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment the wall between them cracked. A vulnerability peeked through, a glimpse of the boy who had been hidden, the boy whose life had been interrupted and rewritten. You notice too much, he said, almost a whisper. And that could be dangerous. I'll take the risk, she replied, heart hammering. Because someone should notice. Someone should care. He looked away again, muttering under his breath. You shouldn't care about me. Maybe I shouldn't, she admitted. But I do anyway. Daniel remained silent after that. The air was heavy, almost painful. Yet for the first time, Dolores sensed a subtle shift. A door opening inside him, not fully, not yet, but enough for her to see that trust, however fragile, could begin to grow. When she stood to leave, he didn't call after her. He didn't tell her to go. He just let her slip into the night, letting the storm mask her retreat. Dolores walked home, the city streets slick and glowing with rain-soaked lights. Her mind raced. That scar, her knowledge of it, was a key, the first real piece of evidence connecting him to the boy everyone said was gone. And the thought that had been forming quietly, almost fearfully, now took shape fully. Julian Holloway isn't lost. He's here. In front of me. And he doesn't even know how close I am to the truth. The pull of that truth settled in her chest like a stone, heavy, unyielding, and impossible to ignore. Because once you notice something like this, there's no turning back. And Dolores knew she was standing on the edge of a story that could change everything, if she dared to step forward. The next morning, Dolores couldn't focus. Every task at the Holloway house felt half-finished, her thoughts circling back to Daniel, the scar, and the photograph that had haunted her mind. The memory of that soft, broken melody kept slipping into her head. It wasn't just the tune, it was his tune, the boy's tune. Julian's tune. Richard Holloway, meanwhile, moved through his morning routine with a precision that bordered on mechanical. Coffee brewed at exactly 6:15. Shirts ironed to perfection. No room for deviation, no time for distraction. But Dolores noticed it, like she noticed everything, how his hand lingered on the edge of the kitchen counter when the radio hummed softly in the background. Classical music. Strings. The very song Julian had hummed in the abandoned house. He paused mid-step, coffee mug in hand, staring at the radio. His expression was distant. The kind of distant that meant memory had reached out and hit him in the chest. "Is something wrong, sir?" Dolores asked quietly, hovering near the doorway. Richard's hand clenched around the mug. He didn't answer immediately. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "I thought I left that behind." Dolores tilted her head. "Sir?" He looked at her, eyes shadowed with grief and something else, something unspoken. "That song," he said finally. "It reminds me of him." Dolores froze. "Julian?" He flinched at the name but didn't correct her. "Yes," he admitted, voice tight. "It's been years, but I can't forget." The way he said it, the way the words hovered in the air, almost choking him, hit Dolores harder than she expected. She realized then that the father and son had never truly stopped reaching for each other, even if the world insisted the boy was gone. Later that evening, as Dolores walked home, her mind replayed every detail: the scar, the photograph, Daniel's cautious voice. And then she remembered Richard's reaction. The song. The moment of pause, the flicker in his eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. Recognition. Pain. Longing. The abandoned house loomed ahead in the misty twilight. Daniel sat on the porch steps, head bowed, hands resting on his knees. The candle flickered behind him. His fingers tapped lightly on his leg, rhythm imperfect but unmistakable, the same tune. Dolores froze, heart hammering. "Daniel?" she said softly. He looked up, startled. "You're early," he said, voice wary but not harsh. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "I heard it again." He swallowed, eyes darting to the faint shadows in the room, then back to her. I was just humming. Nothing else." She stepped closer, careful to respect the invisible line he had drawn around himself. "It's not nothing," she said. "It's you. And it's him too, isn't it?" He flinched. "Don't." "I know," she interrupted gently. "I know who you are." For the first time his guard faltered. His shoulders sagged slightly. The tension in his chest eased for a fraction of a second, but his eyes burned with caution. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. "Because someone should," Dolores replied. "Because someone has to notice when the world pretends you don't exist." He looked away, jaw tight. "You shouldn't have seen it. You shouldn't know." "Too late for that," she said softly. Daniel's gaze shifted toward the candlelight flickering on the wall. Shadows stretched across the peeling wallpaper, reminding her how fragile and transient life could be when hidden away. And yet, in that dim room, something shifted. Trust, perhaps. Or the first step toward it. "Dolores," he began, voice low. "Yes. You keep coming. And you notice things no one else does. But it's dangerous. You don't know what it means to be me." "I don't care," she said firmly. I'll take that risk." The words hung in the air like a promise. Outside, the fog drifted low over the street, and the abandoned house seemed quieter, smaller, but alive in ways the city never saw. As Dolores left that night, stepping carefully over the puddles, she realized something chilling. The melody, the scar, the photograph, all the small, almost invisible clues, were converging. And the moment she truly understood what Daniel meant by danger was coming closer than either of them could imagine. Because noticing the truth didn't just risk her heart. It risked everything. The storm was just beginning. The next morning, Dolores woke to a city shrouded in mist. The street outside her apartment was empty, gray, and heavy with the remnants of last night's rain. She moved mechanically through her morning routine, but her mind wasn't on the Holloway house, the groceries she had left for Daniel, or even the soft hum of the city waking up. Her mind was on the scar, the photograph, the melody, the way Richard's eyes had shifted when he heard it on the radio. By the time she arrived at the Holloway house, her chest felt heavy, almost like she was carrying the weight of every secret in that house, and every secret Daniel was holding in the abandoned house. Richard Holloway was in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, staring out the window at the drizzle. Dolores hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to speak or just remain unseen. "You've been quiet," Richard said without turning. I was just thinking," she replied carefully. "Thinking about what?" "About the boy," she said, testing the waters. He stiffened. His hand gripped the mug tighter. "You shouldn't," he said finally, voice low, almost a whisper. "I know," Dolores said softly. "But I think I might have found him." Richard's gaze snapped toward her. For a brief second, raw hope flashed across his eyes, and then he blinked, trying to suppress it. "You're mistaken," he said, though his voice betrayed a tremor. Dolores shook her head. "No, I'm not. I saw him. He's alive. He's hiding in the abandoned house on Sycamore Road. And his name is Daniel. But he's Julian Holloway." The words hung in the air. Richard's face drained of color. He gripped the edge of the counter until his knuckles whitened. "How?" he whispered. Dolores held his gaze. "The scar, sir. The melody. The photograph. Everything points to him. You can see it too, can't you?" Richard's hand fell from the counter. He ran a trembling hand over his face, eyes fixed on the floor. After all these years, after every failed search, every lead that went cold, he swallowed hard, voice breaking. "And he's been alive all this time?" Dolores nodded. "Yes. And I've been seeing him, bringing him food, talking to him. He trusts me, a little." Richard's hands shook. He turned abruptly and began pacing the kitchen. "He's my son, and I didn't, how could I have missed it? All these years thinking he was gone forever." His voice cracked. "And he's been so close, suffering, hiding." Dolores stayed silent, letting him absorb the truth. She had seen grief before, but this was something heavier. Something sharp that cut deep and refused to be soothed by words. After a long pause, Richard looked at her, eyes burning with a mixture of fear, hope, and guilt. "If he's here, we have to be careful. We can't rush this. If he's been hiding all these years, he's afraid. Afraid of me, afraid of everyone. He won't come back just because we want him to." Dolores nodded. "I know. But he's alive. And that's the first step." Richard closed his eyes. "The first step, yes. God help me, I have to find a way to bring him home safely. I can't lose him again." Dolores watched him, the weight of his remorse and longing pressing in. She realized that in his own way he had been suffering just as much as Daniel, just in a different way. Later that evening she approached the abandoned house once more, her hands clutching a bag of soup and bread. Daniel was sitting on the porch steps, humming softly, the faint melody echoing through the fog. She watched him for a moment, her heart tightening. "Daniel," she said, stepping forward carefully. He looked up, wary, eyes narrowing. "You again?" "Yes," she said gently. I need to tell you something. It's important. He shifted, tense. Important how? Dolores took a deep breath. Your father, he's looking for you. Richard Holloway. He knows where you might be. He's been searching all this time. Daniel froze. The bag in his hand slipped slightly. His eyes widened, fear and disbelief mingling with something else, something like recognition. My father? His voice barely a whisper. Yes, Dolores said softly. He wants to find you, to bring you home. Daniel's body stiffened. He sank back onto the steps, hands gripping the wood. His face twisted with a storm of emotions. Anger, fear, disbelief, longing, all layered and raw. I can't, he whispered finally. I can't go back. Not like that. Not after everything. Dolores knelt in front of him. You don't have to decide now. Just let him know you're alive. That's the first step. Daniel's eyes met hers, searching, haunted. The storm inside him was fierce, unrelenting. And yet, in that brief moment, something shifted. A crack in the walls he had built around himself. Outside, the fog thickened. The abandoned house seemed to hold its breath. Dolores stood slowly, leaving the bag of food at his feet, giving him space but never leaving entirely. And Daniel sat there, trembling, realizing that the truth he had buried, Julian Holloway, son of Richard Holloway, was finally inching its way toward daylight. The first major plot twist had struck. The boy everyone thought lost wasn't lost at all. He had been here, hiding, living in silence, while the world moved on without him. And now there was no turning back. Daniel didn't sleep that night. Dolores knew it the moment she saw him the next evening. His eyes were rimmed red, his shoulders slumped in a way that spoke of hours spent arguing with ghosts. The abandoned house smelled faintly of dust and damp wood, but underneath it all was something sharper, fear that had been stirred awake after years of forced quiet. You shouldn't have told him, Daniel said flatly before she could even set the food down. Dolores stopped. I didn't tell him where you are, she replied carefully. Only that you're alive. That's enough, he snapped. His voice echoed off the cracked walls, louder than he probably intended. He ran a hand through his hair and turned away, pacing the small room. That's how it starts. One person knows. Then another. Then suddenly I don't exist on my own terms anymore. Dolores watched him, letting the anger burn itself down. She had learned long ago that fear often wore the loudest voice. You think I wanted this? She said quietly. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to tear open your life. He stopped pacing. Slowly. Then why? He asked, not looking at her. Why couldn't you just let me stay invisible? Dolores swallowed. Because you're not invisible, she said. You've just been hiding. He let out a bitter laugh. Hiding kept me alive. The words landed heavily. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, a car passed somewhere far off, tires hissing against wet pavement. The world kept moving, indifferent to the fragile standoff inside the abandoned house. Daniel sank onto the edge of the mattress, elbows on his knees. You don't know what he's like, he said finally, or what it was like before everything fell apart. Dolores stepped closer, slow and cautious. Then tell me. His jaw tightened. He wasn't cruel, he said after a pause. That's the worst part. He was distant. Always working. Always tired. Always saying later. He stared at the floor, eyes unfocused. Later never came. Dolores sat across from him, close enough to listen, far enough not to crowd him. The night I disappeared, Daniel continued, voice dropping, we fought. Over something stupid. I don't even remember what it was anymore. I just remember walking out. I remember thinking, if I didn't come back right away, he'd finally notice. His hands clenched. Then everything went wrong. Dolores felt her chest tighten. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush him. She let the silence do its work. I didn't plan to vanish forever, he said. But days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And then it felt too late. Too late for what? She asked gently. For him to forgive me, Daniel said. For me to forgive myself. The weight of those words pressed down hard. Dolores could see it now, not just a missing boy but a man trapped inside a moment he never escaped. Your father hasn't forgiven himself either, she said softly. Daniel scoffed. You don't know that. I do, she replied. I see it every day. The way he pauses when he hears certain songs. The way he still sets 2 cups out some mornings before catching himself. Daniel's breath hitched before he could stop it. He turned his face away, ashamed of the reaction. He kept your room exactly the same, Dolores added. Even now. Daniel's shoulders trembled. Just slightly. That doesn't erase what happened, he said hoarsely. No, Dolores agreed. But it means you mattered. You still do. Silence stretched again, thicker this time. He rubbed his palms together as if trying to warm them. If he finds me, Daniel said, everything changes. People will ask questions. The past will come rushing back. And I don't know if I can survive that. Dolores leaned forward. What if you don't have to face it all at once? He looked up, wary. What are you saying? I'm saying you don't have to go home tomorrow, she said. Or even next week. But maybe you let him hear your voice. Just once. Daniel shook his head immediately. No. Think about it, she pressed gently. Not for him. For you. His eyes searched hers, looking for betrayal, for pressure. He found none. Only patience. I'll think, he said finally. It wasn't a promise. But it wasn't refusal either. As Dolores stood to leave, Daniel spoke again, quieter now. If this goes wrong. She turned back. You'll still see me, he said. Won't you? Dolores didn't hesitate. Yes. She stepped out into the night, heart pounding, knowing something fragile had shifted. Daniel hadn't agreed to return. He hadn't forgiven. He hadn't even fully believed. But the walls around him had cracked. And sometimes, that was the most dangerous moment of all. The next few days passed in a strange, uneasy quiet. Not peaceful, never that, but careful, like everyone was walking across thin ice, afraid of making a sound that might cause everything to fracture. Dolores noticed it first in Richard. He moved slower, thought longer. He stopped issuing commands and started asking questions he didn't actually want answered. Each morning, he lingered by the window a little more, eyes searching the street as if his son might simply appear there, unchanged, waiting. He never asked Dolores for updates. That restraint told her everything. And Daniel changed in subtler ways. He began cleaning the abandoned house, wiping down surfaces that hadn't mattered to him before. He fixed a loose hinge on the door. He shaved. Small things. Unspoken things. The kind of preparation people make when they're not ready to admit they're preparing for anything at all. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the roof, Dolores brought dinner and found him sitting on the floor, surrounded by old papers and a worn backpack. What's all this? She asked. He hesitated. Stuff I kept, he said. Things I couldn't throw away. She crouched beside him. Inside the backpack were school worksheets, folded and refolded, a faded photograph of a younger boy standing stiffly beside a man in a suit, and a small silver object wrapped in cloth. Daniel picked it up last. A watch, he said quietly. My father gave it to me. Said a man should know how to keep time. His fingers trembled as he turned it over. The glass was cracked, the hands frozen at 8:42. Dolores felt a chill. Do you remember when it stopped? Daniel nodded once. The night I left. The silence that followed was heavy. You don't have to do this alone, Dolores said gently. He looked at her, eyes tired. You keep saying that like it's simple. It's not, she replied. But it's possible. He exhaled slowly, then reached for his phone, an old prepaid one he rarely used. He stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering. What if he hates me? Daniel asked. Dolores shook her head. That's not what I've seen. What if he's angry? He might be, she admitted. But anger isn't the opposite of love. Indifference is. Daniel swallowed hard. Then, with a sharp breath, he pressed a number he had memorized long ago and never dared to use. Rang. Once. Twice. Dolores felt her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Then click. Hello. Richard's voice came through, strained and cautious, as if he no longer trusted hope. Daniel froze. His eyes filled instantly. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Hello. Richard repeated, sharper now. Who is this? Daniel closed his eyes. His hand shook. Dolores reached out, resting her fingers lightly on his wrist. Not to push, just to anchor. Dad, Daniel whispered. On the other end of the line there was a sound, not a word, not a breath, something between a gasp and a sob. Julian? Richard said, voice breaking completely. Julian, is that you? Daniel nodded even though Richard couldn't see him. Tears slid down his face unchecked. Oh, I'm here. Where are you? Richard asked quickly, panic and urgency colliding. Daniel flinched. I can't say. There was a pause. Then Richard spoke again, slower, steadier, forcing control into his voice. Okay, he said. That's okay. You don't have to. Daniel's shoulders shook. I didn't mean to disappear, he said. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I know, Richard said immediately. I know. They stayed on the line only a few minutes. No plans. No promises. Just proof. Just voices crossing the years. When the call ended, Daniel sat frozen, phone still pressed to his ear. He didn't yell, he said softly, almost confused. Dolores smiled faintly. No. He sounded relieved. Yes. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, breathing hard. That makes it worse, he murmured. How? Because now I can't pretend. He moved on. Outside, headlights swept briefly across the boarded windows. Daniel tensed instantly, fear snapping back into place. Someone's watching, he said suddenly. Dolores turned toward the window, heart jumping. The street was empty again, but the feeling didn't fade. Daniel stood, eyes dark. If anyone else finds out I'm alive, he said, voice tight, this won't stay between us. And in that moment, Dolores realized the second truth unfolding quietly beneath the first. Someone else already knew. Dolores felt it before she understood it. The shift in the air, the way the abandoned house seemed to tighten around them like it was listening. Daniel stood near the window, barely breathing, his eyes fixed on the narrow gap between two boards. There was a car, he said quietly. Didn't stop. Just slowed. Dolores moved closer, careful not to make sudden sounds. She peered out. The street was empty now, slick with rain, reflecting the dull glow of a distant street lamp. Nothing looked wrong. That made it worse. People slow down all the time, she said, though she didn't fully believe it. Daniel shook his head. Not here. Not like that. He stepped back from the window and paced, agitation sharp in every movement. This is what I was afraid of. One call. One crack. And suddenly the walls aren't holding. Dolores set her bag down, grounding herself. Let's slow this down, she said. Tell me why you're so sure. Daniel hesitated, then reached into the backpack again. He pulled out a folded envelope, edges worn thin. He handed it to her. I got this 2 weeks ago, he said. No return address. Dolores opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Type. No signature. You can't stay hidden forever. Her stomach dropped. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want it to be real, Daniel said. I thought it was someone messing with me. Or my imagination. Dolores folded the paper back into the envelope, her hand steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. Did it say anything else? He shook his head. That was enough. They stood in silence, the sound of rain filling the gaps between their thoughts. Dolores's mind raced through possibilities. A neighbor. A passerby. Someone who remembered a missing boy's face too well. Or something worse. At the Holloway house, Richard was having his own restless night. He sat alone in the study, lights dimmed, phone resting on the desk like it might ring again if he stared hard enough. Julian's voice still echoed in his ears, older, rougher, but unmistakably his son's. There was a knock at the door. Richard frowned. It was late. No one announced visits anymore. He rose slowly and opened it to find a man in a dark coat, hair slicked neatly back, holding a slim folder. "Mr. Holloway," the man said smoothly. "My name is Victor Lang. I work with unresolved cases." Richard's heart thudded. "I told the police everything years ago." Lang smiled, polite but thin. "I'm not with the police." Richard stiffened. "Then why are you here?" Lang glanced past him as if measuring the house. "Because sometimes missing people don't want to be found. And sometimes," he added, eyes sharpening, "they're helped by others." Richard felt a cold wave wash over him. "If this is about money?" "It's not," Lang said. "It's about truth. And discretion." Back at the abandoned house, Daniel paced again, rubbing his arms. "If someone's watching," he said, "they might go to him next." Dolores looked up sharply. "Richard." "Yes." Her phone buzzed suddenly in her pocket. Both of them froze. She pulled it out with trembling fingers. A text message. Unknown number. "Be careful who you trust." Her breath caught. Daniel saw her face and didn't need to ask. "They know," he said flatly. Dolores's mind snapped into focus. "Listen to me," she said. "You did nothing wrong by calling your father. But we have to be smart now." Daniel laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Smart would have been staying silent." "No," she said firmly. "Smart is staying alive." He stopped pacing and looked at her, really looked at her. "If this turns ugly," he said, "you walk away. You owe me nothing." She shook her head. "That's not how this works." Outside, an engine hummed briefly, then faded. Inside, 3 lives, father, son, and the woman caught between them, were being pulled toward a confrontation none of them could yet see clearly. And somewhere in the city, Victor Lang closed his folder, already certain of one thing. The boy everyone thought was gone had made his first mistake. Dolores woke the next morning to the dull ache of worry settled deep in her chest. Sleep had been brief and fitful. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's haunted expression, the envelope with the ominous message, and the faint memory of Victor Lang's cold, measured voice. Something was shifting, and she could feel the tension tightening around them like a noose. She arrived at the abandoned house just as the first light filtered weakly through the broken windows. Daniel was already up, pacing near the single mattress, his movements jerky and restless. The faint hum of the city outside seeped through the walls, but it sounded distant, almost unreal compared to the storm raging in that small room. "Morning," she said softly, careful not to startle him. Daniel didn't look up. "I didn't sleep," he muttered. "I can't. Not after last night." Dolores set the bag of food down quietly. "You need to eat. And you need to think clearly. Whoever it is, they're not just going to vanish." He paused, finally turning toward her. "I know." His eyes flickered with frustration and fear. "I just don't know if I'm ready for what comes next. I left once. I can't do it again." She stepped closer, crouching to meet his gaze. "You won't be alone this time." "Not really." He laughed bitterly. "Not alone? Everyone has a role in this little play. The problem is, I don't know if I trust any of them, least of all my father." Dolores frowned, knowing he had every reason to feel that way. "He isn't perfect," she admitted. "But he's willing to try. You have to believe that." Daniel's hands trembled as he reached into his backpack again. He pulled out the silver watch, the one Richard had given him years ago. He turned it over, staring at the frozen hands, then clenched it in his palm. Time stopped that night, he said quietly. And I've been living in the pause ever since. Maybe it's easier not to move at all than to face what's left behind. Dolores reached out tentatively, resting her hand on his arm. It's not easier, but it's necessary. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he finally exhaled, a shaky breath that carried both relief and resignation. I'm scared, he admitted. Scared of him, scared of what happens if he knows everything. You're allowed to be scared, Dolores said softly. But fear can't be the reason you stay hidden forever. You've survived this long. You can survive the next step too. Daniel shook his head slightly. Survive isn't the same as living. She nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. No, it isn't. But you have a choice now. You can decide what living means to you. And you don't have to do it alone. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the floor, eyes shadowed. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached for his phone. He thumbed through numbers until he found one he hadn't dared call before. Dolores held her breath as he pressed dial. The phone rang once, twice, and then, click. Julian? Richard's voice, tentative, careful, came through. Daniel's jaw tightened. I need to talk. But not here. Not like this. There was a pause. Where? Richard asked softly. Daniel shook his head. I'll let you know. Not today. But soon. The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone for a long moment, then tucked it away. Dolores could see the storm inside him, the mix of fear, guilt, and longing. You're moving too fast, he muttered. No, she said firmly. You're finally facing what's been chasing you all these years. That's not too fast. That's necessary. Outside, the fog was thick, curling around the abandoned house in ghostly tendrils. Somewhere down the street, an engine hummed faintly, then faded into silence. Daniel finally sank onto the mattress, exhausted. I don't know if I can do this, he whispered. Dolores knelt beside him. You won't have to do it alone. Not this time. And no matter what comes, you'll still have a choice. He let her words settle, his hands resting on the silver watch. For the first time in a long while, the tension in his shoulders eased just slightly. And as Dolores stood to leave, a faint sound echoed through the walls, a soft tap, almost imperceptible. She froze, listening. The abandoned house seemed quieter than it had ever been, but that tap was deliberate. Daniel's eyes narrowed. We're not alone, he said. Dolores nodded, heart pounding. And whatever happens next, we need to be ready. The fog outside thickened, swallowing the street, the house, and the fragile sense of safety they had built. Something was coming. Something that would force every secret into the open. And neither Julian nor Dolores could see it yet. The next evening, the abandoned house seemed heavier than usual. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with dampness, clinging to the walls and creeping into the corners. Daniel sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the floor, the silver watch in his hands. Dolores noticed how his movements were tight, almost mechanical, like every muscle was braced for impact. You've been quiet, she said softly, setting down the bag of food. What's going on in that head of yours? Daniel didn't look up. I feel like someone's out there. Watching. Waiting. Dolores crouched beside him, her hand brushing lightly over his arm. You're probably right. But paranoia won't help. You need to focus. He laughed bitterly. Focus? After all this? After everything I've seen? You survived, she said calmly. You can survive this too. Daniel shook his head. Survive isn't enough anymore. I don't want to survive. I want answers. And I think they're closing in. Dolores frowned. What do you mean? He gestured vaguely toward the window, where shadows shifted even though the street appeared empty. I don't know exactly, but I feel it. Every time I step outside, every time I hear a car, a footstep, a voice. Someone's trying to find me. Dolores's pulse quickened. She had suspected this, but hearing it from him made it real. "We need a plan," she said. "We can't just wait for them to come to you." Daniel finally looked at her, eyes dark and raw. "A plan? You don't understand. I don't know who's involved. Could be the police, could be someone else entirely. Someone dangerous." Dolores nodded. "Then we move carefully. We set traps. We watch for patterns. You're not going to be alone in this." He let out a shaky breath. "I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore." "You can trust me," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "I'm not going to leave." For a moment, Daniel seemed to consider it, the weight of suspicion and fear pressing against him. Then his face hardened. "Okay," he said finally. "But if this goes wrong—" "It won't," Dolores interrupted. "We'll be ready." The night stretched on, filled with the quiet hum of the city beyond the boarded-up windows. Dolores watched Daniel move around the room, preparing food, arranging blankets, checking the perimeter of the house. Every gesture was precise, deliberate, born of years spent hiding and surviving. Hours later, as they sat eating in silence, a faint noise came from outside, a soft, almost imperceptible tap, like someone testing a window. Daniel froze. "There it is," he whispered. Dolores's heart raced. She moved toward the window, peering through the cracked boards. The street was empty again, but the feeling of being watched pressed against her chest like a physical weight. "They're close," Daniel said, voice low and tense. "I can feel it." Dolores nodded. "Then we wait, carefully. And we don't make a sound." For the first time since she had begun visiting, Dolores felt the full weight of the danger they were in. Not just Daniel's past, not just his father's search, but someone else entirely, a hidden observer who knew more than they should. And as they sat in the dim light of the abandoned house, shadows dancing across the walls, both of them understood one chilling truth. The game had begun. No one was innocent anymore. And survival would demand more than caution. It would demand choices that could change everything. That night, the abandoned house felt smaller. The walls seemed to lean in, closing off any escape. Dolores had insisted they keep the boards on the windows intact, but every shadow outside seemed alive, shifting and creeping closer. Daniel moved restlessly, checking locks, peering out at the empty street, muttering half-formed plans under his breath. "I can't shake it," he said finally, running his hands through his hair. "It's like someone knows my every move. Every time I step outside, I feel it." Dolores set her bag of food down and knelt beside him. "You're not imagining it. I felt it too. Whoever this is, they're patient. They're watching. Waiting for the right moment." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we make sure there is no right moment." They ate in tense silence, the dim candlelight casting long shadows across the room. The sound of a distant engine or a footstep outside made them both flinch, hearts pounding in unison. Hours later there was a knock at the door, soft, deliberate, measured. Daniel froze. Dolores held her breath. "Do not open it," she whispered. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Daniel reached for a small baseball bat he had hidden beneath the mattress. "I'm not doing this," he muttered. "Not today." Dolores took his hand gently. "Let me handle it." Slowly she approached the door and peered through the crack. Outside, a man in a dark coat stood, hands visible, no weapon, but his presence carried authority and calm menace in equal measure. "Victor Lang," Daniel hissed, recognition sharpening his features. "He's here." Dolores opened the door a fraction, enough to speak without inviting him in. "What do you want?" she demanded. Lang smiled faintly. "Ah, Dolores, always the careful one. I admire that. But I'm not here for pleasantries. I'm here because your friend here," he said, glancing at Daniel, "has something that belongs in the world, not hidden away. And he's about to make a very big mistake if he doesn't cooperate." Daniel stepped forward, fists clenched. "I don't belong to anyone. I'm not going anywhere with you." Lang tilted his head. "Ah, but that's the problem, isn't it?" You think you have a choice. You don't. Not really. People are invested now, your father, the system, even Dolores. But I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to negotiate. Daniel's face twisted with anger and fear. Negotiate? You don't know anything about me. Lang's smile widened just enough to be unsettling. On the contrary, I know quite a lot. Enough to make you reconsider what you think is safe. Enough to show you that staying hidden has consequences you've not yet faced. Dolores's stomach tightened. She had suspected someone was closing in, but hearing Lang's words, watching the deliberate calm in his movements, made the danger undeniable. What do you want from him? She asked, her voice firm. Lang's eyes shifted to hers. Cooperation. Information. Control. Nothing more, nothing less. He can resist if he wants, but I assure you the consequences will be unpleasant. Daniel stepped in front of her, shielding her without thinking. You're not touching her, he growled. Lang raised his hands in mock surrender. Calm down. She's useful, yes, but not your concern. Yet. His gaze sharpened. You, however, have a choice. You can make it now, or let it be made for you. He turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the night, leaving a lingering tension that pressed on Daniel's chest like a vice. Dolores exhaled slowly. He's going to be back, she said. And next time it won't just be words. Daniel sank onto the mattress, hands gripping his face. I can't do this, he muttered. I can't go back. I can't face anyone. Not my father. Not him. Not you. Not anyone. You don't have to face it alone, Dolores said gently. We'll figure it out. Step by step. But we can't ignore it anymore. He looked at her, eyes shadowed, trembling with the weight of years of fear and guilt. Step by step, he echoed, voice barely audible. Outside, the street lay empty once again, but Dolores could feel it. The pull of eyes unseen, watching, calculating, waiting for the next mistake. And in the quiet, both of them understood something chilling. Victor Lang wasn't just a messenger. He was a force, patient and relentless, who could bend events around Daniel until he had no choice left but to confront the truth he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The second major plot twist was in motion. Julian's carefully hidden life was about to collide violently with forces he didn't fully understand, and he would have to fight to survive not just the outside world, but the consequences of everything he had tried to bury. The night felt heavier than any Daniel could remember. The abandoned house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Shadows clung to the corners and every creak of the floorboards made him flinch. Dolores had left only moments ago to get more supplies, leaving him alone with the memories and the pounding of his own heart. He sat on the mattress, the silver watch clutched in his hands, tracing the cracked glass with a trembling finger. Each line, each fracture felt like a timeline of his life, stopped, frozen, unreachable. He could hear the faint hum of the city beyond the boarded windows, but it sounded distant, unreal, as if it belonged to someone else. And then he heard it, a faint, deliberate click outside the door. Daniel froze. His muscles tensed, every instinct screaming danger. He grabbed the baseball bat from beneath the mattress and crept toward the door, listening. The click came again, softer this time, almost playful. Someone was testing him. Probing. Waiting. He pressed his ear to the door, breath shallow. There was nothing. Only the faint echo of the city and his own heart pounding in his chest. He stepped back and sank onto the floor, hands pressed to his face. I can't do this anymore, he whispered to the empty room. I can't live like this, hiding, running, fearing every shadow. A sudden sound, the scrape of metal on wood, made him jump. His heart leaped into his throat. Slowly, cautiously, he rose and moved toward the window, peering through the crack between the boards. The street was empty, silent. Too silent. Then a shadow moved in the fog, tall, deliberate, watching. Daniel recoiled, heart hammering. He slammed the board shut and bolted the lock, hands shaking. Dolores, he muttered, voice tight. She needs to come back. She needs to be here. Minutes stretched into hours. He could hear his own heartbeat, feel the weight of the walls pressing in. Memories of his father, the lost years, the fear, the isolation, they all surged at once. And he realized with a cold clarity that hiding had kept him alive, but it had also trapped him in a prison of his own making. Finally, the faint sound of footsteps outside, soft, cautious, deliberate, made him freeze again. He gripped the bat tighter, every muscle coiled. The doorknob rattled slightly, then stopped. The shadow outside the window remained, watching, waiting. Daniel sank against the wall, knees pulled to his chest. He could feel the weight of every choice pressing down on him. Stay hidden and risk being found unprepared, or step out into the world and face the consequences he had spent years avoiding. The door creaked slightly as if pushed by the wind, or by someone testing the limits. Daniel's fingers tightened around the bat, knuckles white. He couldn't see through the shadows, couldn't know if the world outside had changed, or if it had only become more dangerous. Hours passed like this. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He didn't dare move. The fear was a living thing wrapping itself around his chest, tightening, suffocating. And then, just before dawn, a faint sound reached him. Soft, familiar, impossible. A key turning in the lock. Daniel's heart stopped. Dolores stepped through the doorway, her eyes sharp and alert. "Daniel," she whispered. "It's me. I'm here." He exhaled slowly, relief and fear colliding. You came back," he stammered. "Of course," she said, stepping closer, her gaze scanning the shadows outside. "And you're going to be okay. But we need to move now. He's not leaving you alone. Not for much longer." Daniel's hands shook as he put down the bat. I don't know if I can." "You can," she said firmly. "Because you're not alone. And because the only way to survive is to face it." Outside, the street lay in fog, silent and waiting. But Daniel knew with a chilling certainty that nothing in his life would ever be quiet again. The trap had been set. The second major plot twist, the hidden threat that had been stalking him, was closing in. And Daniel realized the world he had fled from years ago was now standing at his doorstep, demanding he confront every fear, every secret, every truth he had buried. The storm had begun. The night had settled like a heavy blanket over the city, the fog curling through the streets like smoke. Inside the abandoned house, Daniel and Dolores moved silently, packing a few essentials into a small duffel. Every creak of the floorboards sounded deafening. Every distant car horn, every rustle of paper outside, made Daniel flinch. "We don't have much time," Dolores whispered, pulling a thin jacket over her shoulders. "He's not going to wait. Whoever's out there, they're patient but they're relentless." Daniel nodded, gripping the silver watch in his hand as though it were a lifeline. His eyes darted constantly to the shadows outside. "I don't know if I can do this," he muttered, voice tight. "I can't keep running, but I can't stay either." "You're stronger than you think," Dolores said softly. "And you're not alone. Not anymore." They stepped out cautiously, moving toward the back alley that Dolores had scoped earlier. The night air was damp, smelling faintly of rain and asphalt. Every step was deliberate, measured. Every shadow was a potential threat. And then they saw them, two figures, tall, moving with deliberate precision, slipping silently through the fog. Daniel's breath caught. He instinctively froze, every muscle coiled. "They're here," he whispered. Dolores grabbed his arm. "Keep moving. Don't let them see you hesitate." They ducked behind a dumpster, pressing close to the wall. The two figures passed without noticing them, shadows among shadows. But the danger was palpable. Daniel's chest tightened. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. One of the men paused, scanning the alley with a trained eye. Daniel held his breath, forcing himself to stay still. Dolores's hand brushed his shoulder, grounding him. "They're looking for something," she whispered. "Or someone." Daniel's jaw clenched. Me. Dolores nodded. Exactly. And we need to get out of here before they realize how close we are. They crept forward, moving toward the end of the alley. The fog thickened, muffling the sounds of the city, giving them both the illusion of safety. But Daniel knew better. He had spent years living with the constant pressure of being hunted, and he could feel it in his bones. The danger was closing in. Suddenly one of the figures stopped. Daniel froze, eyes wide. The man turned his head slowly, scanning the alley. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Daniel's stomach dropped. Dolores yanked him behind a stack of crates just as the man took a step forward. The second figure had already noticed movement on the far side, shifting toward them with methodical precision. We have to move now, Dolores hissed. Daniel nodded, adrenaline surging. They sprinted through the fog, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. Footsteps, the snap of a branch, the faint hiss of tires on wet pavement. Every noise threatened to give them away. They rounded a corner into a side street, breathing hard, hearts hammering. Daniel's legs shook from exertion and fear. He gripped the duffel tightly, the silver watch pressing against his palm like a reminder of everything at stake. "Do you have a place to go?" Dolores asked, voice low but urgent. Daniel shook his head. "No. I don't know anyone I can trust." "You trust me, don't you?" she asked, meeting his gaze. He hesitated. Then slowly he nodded. I trust you." Dolores exhaled, a brief, fleeting relief. "Then follow me. We'll keep moving. We won't stop until we're safe." Behind them, the footsteps slowed for a moment, then resumed with renewed determination. Daniel's stomach dropped. Whoever was pursuing them knew they were running. The net was tightening. As they ducked into another alley, a sudden voice cut through the fog. Calm, authoritative, and unmistakable. "Julian Holloway," Victor Lang called. "You can't hide forever." Daniel froze. Dolores's hand squeezed his shoulder. The hunt had become personal. And in that instant, Daniel realized a terrifying truth. The game was no longer about survival. It was about control. And Victor Lang intended to win. The alley was a blur of fog, shadows, and adrenaline. Daniel's lungs burned with every breath, and his legs felt like lead, but he couldn't stop. Not now, not when the sound of pursuit echoed behind them. Dolores kept close, guiding him through narrow passages and over slick, uneven pavement. "They're still following us," Daniel panted, fear clawing at his chest. "We can't outrun them forever." Dolores's eyes scanned every corner, every flicker of movement. "Then we don't have to outrun them. We need a plan. Somewhere they won't expect us." Daniel's stomach twisted. "Like where?" "The city is a maze. Every street, every alley, they know them all. They've been watching for weeks, maybe months." Dolores pulled him into a small doorway hidden behind a stack of crates. She pressed herself against the wall, hand over his mouth for a moment. Daniel froze as the sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing down the alley. "They're close," she whispered. "Wait." They held their breath as the two figures passed just outside. One paused, muttered something under his breath, and then moved on. Daniel's knees shook from tension. When the footsteps finally faded, he exhaled slowly, almost trembling from relief. "That was too close," he whispered. "Way too close." Dolores nodded. "We need to keep moving. And we need to trust no one, not yet." They emerged from the doorway and headed toward an old, disused subway entrance Dolores knew about. It wasn't ideal, but it offered cover and a way to disappear from anyone tracking them above ground. As they descended the dark, narrow stairwell, Daniel's mind raced. Why him? Why now? Why is Victor Lang so obsessed with me? Dolores glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "He doesn't just want you, Daniel. He wants what you represent. All the secrets, all the things hidden, he wants control. And he's patient enough to wait until you make the first mistake." Daniel's stomach turned. "And what if I already have?" Dolores's eyes softened. "Maybe. But that doesn't mean it's over. Not yet. They reached the bottom of the stairwell and moved carefully along the abandoned subway tunnel. The faint echo of dripping water and distant rat scuttles was the only sound. Daniel felt a small measure of relief, until the flashlight beam appeared at the far end of the tunnel. Victor Lang. Calm, collected, his eyes cold and calculating, just like Daniel remembered from the alley. And behind him, another figure, someone Daniel didn't recognize, watched silently. "You're persistent," Lang said smoothly. "I admire that. But persistence only gets you so far." Daniel's fists clenched. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" Lang stepped closer, the light catching his sharp features. "I told you before. I want cooperation. Information. The truth. And you've been hiding from it for too long." Daniel shook his head. "I don't owe you anything." Lang's smile was thin, almost cruel. "Ah, but that's where you're wrong. You owe yourself. And your father. You can run, hide, refuse, but eventually the consequences catch up. And they always do." The second figure stepped forward. Daniel froze. He recognized the face, someone he had trusted once, long ago. A family friend who had vanished years ago, or so he thought. "Alex?" Daniel whispered, disbelief in his voice. Why are you with him?" Alex didn't answer. The silence was louder than words. Daniel realized the shocking truth. Someone from his past, someone he trusted implicitly, had betrayed him. And Victor Lang had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Dolores moved instinctively, stepping between Daniel and the two men. "Stay back," she warned. Lang's eyes glinted. "Brave but futile. You're outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and your options are dwindling." Daniel's heart pounded. The betrayal cut deeper than the fear, more than the danger. Alex had been a friend, someone he could lean on, someone he had believed in. And now, he was the instrument of Victor Lang's game. Daniel looked at Dolores, desperation and fear in his eyes. "What do we do?" Dolores's jaw tightened. "We fight. But carefully. We survive. And then we take back control." The subway tunnel echoed with the sound of footsteps advancing. Daniel's back was pressed to the wall. Every choice, every step, every breath counted. And in that instant, he realized the second major plot twist. Survival wasn't just about escaping Victor Lang. It was about facing the betrayal of someone he had trusted, someone who had once promised to protect him. The game had changed. The rules had changed. And Daniel Holloway had no choice but to confront both the danger outside and the deception inside. The subway tunnel was cold, dark, and unforgiving. Daniel pressed his back against the wall, gripping the silver watch tightly in one hand and the duffel bag in the other. Dolores crouched beside him, eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. The echo of footsteps reverberated off the concrete walls like a drumbeat of inevitability. Victor Lang stepped forward, calm and deliberate. "Julian," he said, voice smooth, cold. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice." Daniel's eyes narrowed, jaw tight. "The hard way," he said through gritted teeth. Lang's lips curved into the faintest smirk. "As you wish." Alex stepped closer, expression unreadable. Daniel's stomach twisted. "Why?" he demanded. "Why betray me? We were friends." Alex's face was impassive. "This isn't personal, Julian. It's business. It's bigger than you, bigger than me. Bigger than your father. Bigger than him." The words hit harder than a punch. Daniel swallowed, shaking his head. "I trusted you. I believed in you." "You shouldn't have," Alex said quietly. "Belief doesn't survive in this game." Dolores stepped in front of Daniel, raising a hand to keep them both between her and the two men. "You don't get to threaten us anymore. Not here. Not now." Lang's eyes flicked between Dolores and Daniel. "Impressive," he said. "But not enough. The truth is, running has consequences. Hiding has consequences. And trusting the wrong people, Well, that's the deadliest of all. Daniel's mind raced. Every option felt impossible. Every escape route seemed blocked. But then he remembered the silver watch in his hand, the symbol of a life interrupted, a life he wanted to reclaim. He could not let fear define him any longer. "Dolores," he whispered, "we have one chance. We go now while he's distracted." She nodded, understanding immediately. "Ready?" Daniel took a deep breath, focusing on the sound of his own heartbeat. Then, with deliberate movement, he grabbed the duffel bag and flung it toward Lang, knocking him slightly off balance. Lang's surprise lasted only a moment. "Clever?" he said, eyes flashing with annoyance. Dolores lunged forward, grabbing Daniel's arm, and they sprinted toward the side passage Alex hadn't noticed. The fog inside the tunnel swallowed them, muffling their steps, hiding them from immediate view. But they weren't free yet. Alex blocked their exit halfway, arms outstretched. "Stop," he commanded. Daniel skidded to a halt, mind racing. "Alex, please," he said, voice raw. "You don't have to do this. You were my friend." For the first time, Alex's face flickered with hesitation. Something in Daniel's words, in his desperation, reached him. "Julian," he whispered. That pause was all Daniel needed. He grabbed Dolores's hand, and together they darted past Alex, diving into a maintenance hatch Dolores had spotted earlier. It led to a narrow ladder and finally to the street above, hidden behind overgrown shrubs and chain-link fencing. They emerged into the cold night air, lungs burning, hearts hammering, but free for now. Behind them, Lang's voice echoed faintly, shouting into the fog. Alex's figure disappeared in the shadows, uncertain, torn between loyalty and morality. Daniel sank onto the damp ground, pulling Dolores close. "We made it," he whispered, relief and exhaustion colliding. Dolores hugged him tightly. "Yes," she said. "But this isn't over. Not yet. He'll come back. We just bought time." Daniel nodded, chest heaving. "Time to face everything. My father, my past, myself." The next day they went to Richard. No hiding. No running. Daniel's voice trembled as he recounted the entire story. His disappearance, the years of hiding, the fear, and the encounter with Lang. Richard listened in stunned silence, tears streaming down his face as he realized his son had endured more than he ever imagined. "I should have been there," Richard said, voice breaking. "I should have known." "You were searching," Daniel replied softly. "I know, but I had to find my own way back." "I did." They embraced, father and son, years of separation and fear dissolving into a single raw moment of reconciliation. Dolores watched quietly, knowing her role had been crucial but secondary. This was theirs, Daniel and his father, reclaiming what had been lost. Weeks later, Victor Lang's influence began to unravel. Alex, shaken by his own choices, cooperated quietly, revealing the manipulations and traps Lang had set. The shadow over Daniel's life didn't vanish entirely, but he had reclaimed agency, understanding that fear could no longer dictate his existence. The silver watch, once broken and frozen, sat on his bedside table, a reminder of time lost and time reclaimed. Daniel looked at Dolores one evening, gratitude in his eyes. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said. She smiled softly. "You found your strength, Julian. I just reminded you it was there." He nodded, finally at peace. Not with the past. Some scars never fade, but with the knowledge that he had survived, confronted betrayal, and reclaimed his life. And as the city lights twinkled in the distance, Daniel realized something profound. Survival was only the beginning. Living, truly living, began now. The story of Julian Holloway, lost, hunted, betrayed, and finally found, ended not with perfection, but with truth, reconciliation, and the fragile, beautiful possibility of tomorrow.